Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting us, and thanks for the introduction. Just quickly to say the ONS Longitudinal Study, I think, is probably the only one of the closer partnership studies that involves three parties. So as you've described there's ourselves at ONS, there's a Celsius team, a part of this partnership. And the division of roles is that ONS is the data owner, so we maintain, update the data, link the census data, and then access to the data for researchers through ONS's secure research service. And then Celsius are an ESRC funded user support team funded to provide support to UK-based researchers from the public, academic and voluntary sectors. This is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Myself and Ollie got about 10 minutes each, so happy to take questions after, happy to take emails following the event if any questions come up. I'll be covering just a brief overview of what the LS is, a little bit talking about the 2021 census data that we are currently working through the linkage of, and then an update on where we are in terms of progress of that piece of work of linking the census data. Ollie will then talk through about how people can apply to be part of that linkage project, where we invite beta testers to come and test the data. And we'll also then give some examples of high impact LS research from the last decade. Okay, so moving on to just a quick description of what the longitudinal study is. The top text is our standard piece of text that we use to describe the LS. So we contain linked census and life event data for a 1% sample of the population of England and Wales. Key things to note: we're a study, not a survey, so we don't hold a panel of people and send questionnaires out. We actually draw in information from other sources and link it together. Our study covers England and Wales. There's sister studies in each of Scotland and Northern Ireland with similar structures, similar purpose, but kind of slight differences from the way we do things. We're a 1% sample of the England and Wales population, and membership of the study is if you're born on one of four birth dates that we keep very confidential. We don't publish what those four birth dates are. It was set up in the 1970s with the main purpose of studying occupational mortality, so linking 71 census data to subsequent follow-up mortality events and trying to understand differences in mortality by occupation and by social class, but also at that point was planned to be used for fertility birth spacing analysis, has gone on to be used for multiple pieces of research on multiple topics. Just a brief graphic trying to illustrate the structure. So we've now got all five data from all five census points between 71 and 2011, and we're currently working on linking 2021 census data. And then every year between censuses, we bring in data from the Civil Registration Service relating to births and deaths, and from NHS registration systems relating to new NHS registrations and emigrations. And that is typically linked on an annual and released on an annual basis. So our sample is replenished every year through any baby born on one of our four birth dates and any new NHS registration where the immigrant has registered one of our four birth dates. And just to give you an idea of the sort of sample sizes, the population is growing, so each census we capture a higher number of people than we have any census, but the graphic is showing, for example, if you're interested in transitions between the 71 and 81 censuses, we would have a sample size there of just over 400,000. If you're interested in a population where we had census responses for all five censuses currently in the data set, well, we've got 200,000 people where we've got five census responses. So one of our big strengths is the sample size. People typically don't use the whole sample, but having that size a whole sample, it means when you're interested in subsamples, subsets of the population, the chances are we will have enough sample for you to come and use our study for your research. Okay, moving quickly on to the 2021 census. I assume most people will know the census took place last year, 21st of March last year. It was during one of the COVID-19 lockdowns, and that will have an impact on some of the variables and the responses, things like travel to work and the household structures that people were living in. But possibly partly because we were in lockdown, that one of the big stories from the 21 census was the 97% response rate, which exceeded expectations. So it was a very, very successful census. This was the first time we encouraged people to respond online. You could respond online in 2011, but this time the focus was encouraging people to use that as their first option. And almost 90% of those people who did responded online, and that it significantly exceeded our kind of target for online response there. The first results came out on 28th of June earlier this year, which showed a 6% increase in the England and Wales population in the last decade. And we're now working through a series of univariate kind of topic summaries. So the demography and migration release mentioned there, that came out last week. The UK Armed Forces Veterans release mentioned there came out this morning. And we have a series of univariate topic summaries coming out between now and into early in the new year. So we'll be linking data from the 2021 census, or we currently are linking data from the 2021 census to the longitudinal study. So just want to pull out some things that may be of interest to our users. The census questionnaire is different every time. New questions are introduced, some questions are lost, some questions change. The new questions that were introduced for the 2021 census were questions around sexual orientation, gender identity, and whether people had previously served in the UK Armed Forces. So they can be research using those kind of characteristics can be carried out with the LS for the first time. Should be noted, sexual orientation and gender identity were both voluntary questions. So people could choose not to respond if they preferred not to. We then had some questions where 2021 was the second time they were asked. So the first time you could actually look at transitions for individual people in the longitudinal study and see whether their response this time was different to their response 10 years ago. This slide and the next slide, just to say, I'm presenting comparable questions from the two censuses. So that within a dotted line, you've got the 2011 question on the top and the 2021 question on the bottom. If we just skip past the first two on the left, actually, we'll move to the national identity question there. First thing to point out there is that the response order has changed. So British has been brought to the top. That is on the English questionnaire. On the Welsh questionnaire, Welsh was retained at the top. So there, anyone looking at changes there would need to take into account the fact that a change in order could lead to people being more likely, for example, to respond, giving the British option. We asked about people's main language for the second time in 2021, and that question is identical this time, the same this time as last time. And then there was questions around passports held. So the only difference in the question there is a slightly grammatical one, where we've referred to Ireland rather than Irish. And that may be of interest to people looking perhaps at the impact of Brexit as anecdotal or reported evidence that there's been a large uptake in people applying for Irish passports, and we would be able to study, or you would be able to use the LS to study which parts of the population maybe have taken up that option. And then just quickly, I'll probably just pick out a couple of these actually, but changes to the response options this time compared to last time. So again, we've got the 2011 version of the question at the top and the 2021 option beneath. So the one on the far left is the one that we've typically referred to as marital status. In 2011, it was the first time people could have recorded that they were in a civil partnership. But at that point in time, only same-sex couples could hold a civil partnership. By the time we get to 2021, same-sex couples and opposite-sex couples can choose between either civil partnership or marriage. So that question this time around has been separated into first, what is your status, and then whether it's with someone of the same sex or someone of the opposite sex. the ethnic group, the third one along. So we've asked about ethnicity since 1991, but the question has changed every time we learn more between censuses about how people identify, etc. And so each census we've got the kind of question based on the latest information. And for example, the top part here, question 16 and 15, you'll see in 15 there's an option of Roma in addition to Gypsy or Irish traveller, so that was brought in for the first time in 2021. Just finally, to finish off with where we are in terms of the project to link 2021 census data. So we use another organisation called NHS Digital to actually do the work that allows us to link data from different sources for the same individuals, and that requires a contract to be drawn up, and we successfully got a contract that everyone was happy with in place. We had new systems, processing systems built both at our end and at the NHS Digital end. They recruited a team, and this work took place during the pandemic. So fortunately, they had some spare empty office space. We required that this work took place in kind of screened off areas within an office environment. And all of that census data has now been processed, and that work is complete with NHS Digital. And part of the outputs from doing that work is we can feed back to the census quality assurance processes on evidence of undercount and overcount. There's one piece of processing that we are having difficulties with at the moment, which is we need to bring all of the life events data up to date, and the system that we had previously used for that is no longer available to us. So we are just working through the implications of that, and that will have an effect on when the data will become available. Things left to do, we now turn to focus and start designing what our researchers will need when we release the data, hopefully sometime next year. So we need to agree the content, which variables do we put into the database. We need to establish a data dictionary application for people. We have testing, we'll be doing alpha testing within the team and then inviting researchers in for beta testing, and Ollie will talk about more about that in a minute. And then there will be an announcement, a data release and a launch event. Okay, that's a very quick skip through. The slides will be shared. Feel free to contact me or my team on the Longitudinal Study email address, and that's our website, that's our page on the ONS website. And please don't be put off by the fact it's got paid services in that URL. You don't pay to access the Longitudinal Study. Okay, I'll finish there.
Okay, hopefully people can see my opening slide. As Jim said, I'm going to talk about the ONS Longitudinal Study from the Celsius point of view. I also want to thank Rebecca Tratunia, who is going to do the presentation, is unwell, and Nicola Shelton from Celsius as well, who contributed some of the slides. And I'm going to talk sort of quite briskly, giving some examples of research that's been done using the LS, talk about how to access the data, and then the most substantive bit is looking at the 2021 beta test program. So I want to start with some research by Saffron Carlson and others, and here we have some newspaper headlines of reporting of this work, and they looked at intergenerational economic mobility from 1971 through to 2011, and mobility of people using both ethnic group and religion compared to the white British population. They looked at both upward and downward social mobility and showed more downward mobility than upward mobility for a number of groups, including Black Caribbean, Indian, Sikh and Muslims within the Bangladeshi, Indian and Pakistani ethnic groups. But at the same time, more upward mobility amongst Indian Hindu groups. Moving on, some work by Amanda Sacker and others, which has been quoted in the Independent Review of Children's Social Care. They looked at the outcomes for adults who had spent some time in various sorts of care. One of the things they found was looking at long-term illness, a sort of hierarchy of outcomes for types of care. So there was greater probability of having limiting long-term illness for those who'd been in residential care. That was greater than foster care. Foster care was greater than kinship care, and kinship care was a greater probability than those who hadn't been in care. Finally, work by Katarina Hecht and others for the Sutton Trust, looking again at social mobility and elites in the UK, comparing outcomes for movement into elite occupations for a number of birth cohorts. And what they found was, amongst other things, a decline in absolute social mobility. So if you look at the cohort born in 1955 to 61, comparing them to the cohort born 1975 to 81, there was a greater probability for the older cohort that people could move into these elite occupations, and that was less probable for the more recent cohort. So I'm moving briskly because I want to get onto the beta test stuff. The LS, as Jim said, is free to all. Don't be put off by the paid services part of the URL. The research has to be in the public interest, has to protect confidentiality of data relating to individuals, and researchers have to apply for access. Go through all of that. So like a number of secure access studies, researchers need to both be accredited and have completed various sorts of training, and then have their research project approved as well. And the LST, the Celsius team, will assist people in submitting those forms and giving advice on what to say in the forms, what variables to include, and so on. And this goes through a number of layers of approval before a final decision is made and approval is granted for your project. And unfortunately, that's not as quick a process as people would like. It does take some time for that that whole approval chains to take place. Where can you use the LS? There are secure settings, ONS offices. There used to be a secure setting at the ONS offices in Pimlico, but now they've moved into the Home Office, and there isn't a suitable room there, unfortunately. Increasingly, people can use the data remotely if their institution has assured organizational connectivity agreement, and that's an agreement between the institution and the data owners. And if your institution has approval, then it can be possible to use the SRS to access the SRS from a institutionally owned computer at your own home as well. We've got an increasing number of safe pods. Some of you might have used those already. They're small, secure, very small rooms that you can book and go to and use the LS or other secure assets. And we also support the data through remote access at Celsius. So if you send code to us, we'll run it, and if the outputs meet release conditions, we'll send you the output. And this is just a quick map of SafePod locations. So there aren't a huge amount of them. The numbers growing, but they are distributed around the country to a greater extent than the SRS physical rooms are. Jim mentioned that we are starting to see releases of univariate data. So I've just got a very quick advert with my UK Data Service hat on to say those are now available. The data released last week are now available through UKDS as well. Moving on to the beta test, which is the main thing I want to talk about. So the beta test for the LS is looking at joining the 2021 data to the rest of the data, and is testing for accuracy and to confirm that we are able to, ONS are able to release that data. And in order to do that, there's a program of giving access to up to 10 projects to test parts of the data. That will give you early access to the data, and you can also be involved with the public launch of the 2021 data. You won't be able to publish until after that public launch, but obviously you will be able to prepare work before then. Applications are now open, and they'll be open to the end of January. After which there'll be a panel which decides on which projects to approve. The data should be available from mid-23. For all the other stages, I've put question marks on because until ONS have a confirmed date for making those data available, all of those dates have to be provisional. The full release of the data, when everyone should be able to use it, we're hoping is sort of in the period late 23 to early 24. So what do you need to do if you want to? Okay, I'll skip over that. Briefly, the projects need to have a longitudinal element. Can see the other things. What I want to focus on is the projects should focus on certain areas. So those new questions in 21 that Jim mentioned, migration and mobility, international migration, identity and ethnicity, household composition and relationships, the way occupation is coded, general health and long-term illness, caring, and mortality. As Jim said, mortality events are linked as well. If you can make it similar to research that's capable of being carried out with the studies in Scotland and Northern Ireland, that's great. And we're interested in putting together different groups of people to do research together. More information is available here. The short form URL points exactly to the top URL, and the QR code will take you there as well. And that's just the statement for the data that was showed earlier.